What a time it is for us to be gathering to immerse ourselves in the promise and obligation of metamorphosis. Is this a species-level rite of passage? Humans are actually a young, precocious species. Can we survive and become wise, or vice versa? Do we need to become wise in order to survive? Is metamorphosis a deeply radical inner journey? And if that's the case, how does the collective enable or hinder the individual journey? Is it a societal process of revelation and reckoning, which would require examining how we imbue certain individuals and institutions with power? Is it a respooling of the relationship between the observer of reality and the observed? We all know intellectually that how we ask our deepest questions changes the universe of possible answers.
We're going to begin with a few moments of gathering. We know that there are many, many words that will be said this morning, this afternoon. They're going to be good words, brilliant words. We're all wordsmiths here. We're bright. We're entitled. If it could have been solved with words, it would have been solved already. Something else is in us, and it's this something else that we are going to need to draw on, both individually and collectively, to add force, to add a drive shaft to the beautiful words of our minds. And so I'm going to ask us to gather as a group and see if we can find that place and share it. As your mind quiets, let your attention draw into the region of the middle of your being, your heart, your solar plexus. And from there, let it form in you, not necessarily in words, but in feeling. Your wish that brought you here. Your wish for the planet. Your wish for your children or your grandchildren. Your wish for your country. For our one world. And let that wish, in both its sadness and its hope, gather deeply in that center of your chest. And now, joined by my spiritual companions of the world's great traditions, let's plant our feet in that earth again, grow intentional in that wish. Taste it deeply as the collective wish becomes an energy, a live presence in this room.
So our first contemplation will be about contemplation itself, which, like all important words, is a word where a lot of convergence is possible, but there's also divergence about its possibilities, its meaning, its character, and so forth. A word we use in very ordinary ways in English. Let me contemplate this. And it's a word we use for some of the most extraordinary practices and experiences and life ways in our species, in religious traditions and the spiritual but not religious. And so I would suggest what binds all these different meanings together is the notion of a pause, of a gap, of a space between a situation and how we respond to it, between our instincts and our actions in the world.
In our tradition, in our language, Wiyukcha, which would really seem silly in English, would be, what are the trees thinking? What is the water thinking? What is the rock thinking? What is the air, the birds and the animals? What are they thinking about us contemplating? We cannot exclude them because in their world, there's no such thing as anthropocentricity. And maybe that contemplation, that they have consciousness. As I walked into this building, I touched every one of the trees that I possibly could and asked them, what do you think? How do you feel about this question? Not what I think, what we think as humans. What we are leaving out is what we should be contemplating. Who do we gather sustenance from? Because we think that we're changing them because we need to change. But they're continuing their forever cycle, and us just a few minutes in that cycle. Is that to learn, how are they wiyukcha? How are they feeling about us?
I myself am also a traveler and in the journey of spirituality, and not someone who has reached the destination. If that was the case, my last name will probably be Buddha. So I, despite the difference in our dress and, the exoticness of coming from Himalaya, I feel that all of us are in our own journey, and there's many things we can learn from our own journey of life. Offering as well as generosity is often thought of, even in the Buddhism, as an exchange of, giving one object to another. But when we contemplated the deeper meaning of offering or generosity, it actually means letting go. I usually joke that, we may donate $5 we want to donate something to a person, homeless person, for example, and we take out our wallet, and when we see that we don't have $5, but only $50, we may put back the wallet, because we can't let go of that much, but we can only let go of, So to me, one of the biggest part of contemplation is about letting go. That's why recently, when I had a very water offering bowl, so when we were doing one of our rituals, it broke, it fell down. So in one way, we Himalayans are quite superstitious, so I thought it was very inauspicious. Then later I thought, no, it's very auspicious. This is the first time I'm letting go. Till now, I wasn't letting go. I was very proud of the fact that I was making such a beautiful offering to the Buddha, that I wasn't really letting go. And the letting go, when you go into deeper, it also means that as for that moment, I will say as a blessing, I understood that the beautiful ceramic that I offered, it had no inherent identity. Because when the moment it was broken, the identity of the ceramic cup, beautiful being, was broken. And similarly, I realized that all of us in the world, we have so much views. When we watch the social media, we have a right-wing view, left-wing view, central view. And all of us, including myself, we have views. And we forget that these views are also conditional, conceptual, and created maybe at that circumstance, maybe by that society, at that time, in that situation. And this is whatever view we hold also might be true in certain country, in certain situation, but it's not ultimate truth. So I feel that in letting go of, what of our deeply held views and beliefs and concept, letting go is, I think, an offering of contemplation offering. And from letting go, I feel that forgiveness, compromise, compassion, and all of these things arises as, the form of, due to the practice of letting go, letting go. And there is a saying that the greatest of offering, greatest of generosity is not of giving object, but letting go of the concept.
I feel like it's actually an optimistic day because at least it feels not crazy to be around people who are saying everything is crazy. I feel inspired to be in the state of sort of melding minds cross-generationally and culturally, and recognizing that there are like really rich exploratory conversations to be had in every direction right now, and everything is open, and there's this zeitgeist shift to realizing that we are all meant to be creating this, that there are no rules anymore.
These words are the water that does not resist, but coheres. These words bridge time from the past into the present to the future, spiraling to this moment when you're hearing them. These are the stories of our elders, loving the world. It opens. It flows.
Thank you, Yuria.
I used to be a journalist. I was an anchorman at ABC News for a long time, and I spent a lot of time in places where I was able to witness up close our capacity for cruelty. Been all over the Middle East and pretty much every continent we've got. I'm kind of relieved not to be in the game anymore. That being said, I actually do retain some optimism about where we can go from here. And I think there are two strands that give me some optimism. What the modern science is showing us is that the brain and the mind are trainable through many modalities. I'm particularly interested in meditation, but I'm not a meditation fundamentalist. There are lots of ways to change your mind: psychedelics, therapy, access to nature, relationships, social fitness, as it's sometimes called. So I think that is incredibly good news, that we as individuals can change, and of course as individuals embedded in a larger society, our change is important. I sometimes joke that there's a geopolitical case for you to get your shit together, because that is where you have the most agency, and you are embedded, of course, as I said before, in a large web in ways that none of us can really understand. So being a node of sanity in the midst of everything we're seeing on our phones these days is meaningful. But in the Buddhist tradition, and I don't want to claim to be an expert, but the Dalai Lama sometimes talks about thinking about change over the course of many lifetimes.
So stories for the future need to include scientific stories, and until recently, stories based on the hard evolutionary science have been conspicuously absent. What the sciences seem to tell us is that evolution has no purpose. Organisms simply vary, and then only the immediate environment does the selecting. And so against this background, I'm here to report good news. I'm happy to report that there is a new human story for the future based on hard evolutionary science, and I have just enough time on this panel to read you the table of contents. So in chapter 1, we learn that Darwin's theory of evolution goes far beyond genetic evolution. Around the world, for experts and novices alike, if you say the word evolution, most people hear the word genes. But Darwin knew nothing about genes. For Darwin, natural selection was based on 3 words: variation, selection, and replication by any mechanism. And so now this is called generalized Darwinism. In chapter 2, we learn that evolution does have a conscious component. Organisms are not just shaped by their environments, they shape each other with their intentions. And this is true for other species. It's especially true for our own species with cultural evolution. So make no mistake, there is a world out there that exists apart from our existence. We need to understand that world and abide by it. But to an amazing extent, we are capable of first imagining our futures, our social constructions, and then making them a reality. And it's for this reason that we must evolve our practices with the whole earth in mind. And then chapter 4, not only does the new evolutionary story offer inspiration, but it also offers a practical guidance for evolving our future at all contexts and scales, from a village-scale society to our individual well-being, all the way up to the global corporations and nations inhabiting the global village. So this maps onto the 3rd and 4th Noble Truths of Buddhism, that there is a path out of the world of suffering which can be followed with the right kind of knowledge. As I like to put it, there is no master navigator for our journey. We must be the navigator, and without the compass provided by evolutionary theory, we will surely be lost.
At the same time as Darwin was pondering about all of these beautiful ideas, there were women who were not allowed to even consider themselves scientists, but in fact, they contributed a lot. And there is one woman that comes to mind. Her name was Maria Sibylla Merian, and she traveled with her daughter to Suriname because she was curious. She was an artist, but she actually was responsible for creating the foundation of what we understand now as the metamorphosis of insects. And she did it because she didn't look at the insects. She looked at the plants. And she looked at the relationship between the plants and the insects. And so the entire concept of metamorphosis at that time, or until that time, we thought that insects would just self-generate out of mud, so coming out of the earth. And instead, because she looked at the relationship, and it was ecological thinking in action, she literally painted a new picture of a new reality that until that moment, very, very smart men like Darwin and all the others couldn't see. And so the main point here is relationship, obviously, is the key.
Kind of a longing to have the conversations that are happening here, here today, but then Garrison generally, how to better connect that into the world of business and change within business. There's so much power and force that is held by business. The grappling of the recognition of the power and the grappling of the power is essential. You can't not. It's there. And so what do we do with it?
Is there anything that contemplative energy, when it's collected and corralled and manufactured and becomes collective and intentional, is there an energetic transformation that it can place directly into the planetary arteries?
Answering Cynthia's question, maybe I'll start by the theme of today, metamorphosis, which is transformation. And any kind of transformation starts from inner transformation. And based on our team's work, we've kind of summarized the 4 pillars of inner transformation as follows: wisdom, community, practice, and service. And I got in contemplation to practice really almost out of accident. And I walked into a breathwork session after a 10-day fast, which completely changed my life. I was an internet entrepreneur, which was actually had a company that was listed here in New York Stock Exchange. But after that journey, I realized this is not what life is all about. And I really only found that out through contemplative practices. As I listened to this morning's session, there's so much of it about all these language, concepts, all these so-called intelligence that we're locked into in a box. I think the analogy from the last session. And I think contemplative practice is really the most effective way out. Okay, because it clears all these things, and I think Karen was the one who was saying, as we're walking out here, we have to unlearn so many things. Because all these things we've learned over our education, out of our career, has led us into a world that's increasingly uncertain, unpredictable, and going the wrong way.
I always find it very strange that sometimes we can be in the middle of the city and feel so disconnected with everybody. And sometimes we can be in the top of the mountain with nobody around us. Yet we feel love for every sentient being, including the insects and the monkeys, and we feel so connected, through the contemplation. So I think the wish to connect and to share has always been there. That's why I think many Himalayan masters, including I think Dalai Lama, Dalai Lama, many masters have come here. Since we are living in an interconnected world, if we can't take care of the countries or the worlds around us, benefit, and we are all going to get affected. When I talked in the morning about letting go, it is true that in the Vajrayana tradition, we have different depths of contemplation. For example, at the end level, everything is about just being. That is the goal of any meditation. That's for sure. So when you are just being, you are being with the plant, being with the earth, being with the nature. Where even the distinction of who is contemplating who, whether you are contemplating the earth or earth is contemplating you, even these very distinctions are dissolved.
I hope to gain increased wisdom and some understanding of resources to get to that, and also to meet some folks and to establish alliances with our organizations and with me as an individual, for my personal growth.
We now know that all life that has existed in this planet is descendant of a single bacterium that lived about 3 billion years ago, 2.5 billion years ago. Everything, all of us, every plant, every mushroom, whatever you want to call it, comes from that single ancestor. We call it the Luca, right? The last universal common ancestor. And talk about connectivity and what we were talking about, the continuity of being that we were discussing, that's a beautiful example. The other thing which I think is one, I also work in the origin of life. I've been doing that for a while, and we do not know what life is. We know a lot about what life does, but the transition between inanimate matter to matter with life, which is animated, anima, Latin for soul, by the way, is the only way I capture that is to say life is matter with intentionality. Now, how the heck does that happen? How do you make a network of chemical reactions become not just in some sense develop a sense of awareness that it exists because it wants to eat and metabolize energy to remain existing? We have no clue. But it happened here at least, right? And that to me is as magical as it can get. And if we don't get that into our heads, the sacredness of a living planet, it's something that we should all be celebrating every day.
How do you respond to those who come back again and go, trillions of galaxies and all, if humans disappear, who cares?
I mean, if we didn't exist, the universe would be just making stars and planets and nobody would know about it. There would be no word exist, because there would be no words. And what a shame that is, right? And that's the point. That's what we need to preserve, is the fact that we are the memory of the universe's past and possibly future.
I think honoring the rest of life and making sure that the kind of physics that Marcelo is talking about really is integrate into the way we think about everything, including our microorganisms or our brains and our minds. Because we've gotten so materialistic that the human brain study's just gotten to be focused just on technology without really thinking about other aspects of mental function. That's
Could
from the
not agree
spiritual
more.
side.
And I want to make sure other people get in here, but that is essential. And I do think the biological sciences, the animal behavior sciences are giving us vast references
That's
to
right.
the aliveness and
They're
communication.
teaching us about this. We should listen carefully.
We had 9,000 people on a webinar listening to how plants communicate,
Exactly.
you know, and things like that.
Exactly.
So
Very important.
it is coming from the sciences. But thank you so much. So crucial. Yeah.
But I can't help but worry that big geopolitical forces are so much more powerful, and when they explode, it sets everything back, you know, millenniums.
The geopolitical forces, you know, that's the background noise here, right? It's the terrifying, not just noise, but reality. And I've been thinking about this all my life. I have journals and boxes of, are we gonna make it? Because Thomas Berry was saying this 45 years ago. He was, you know, very, very prophetic. So, and the eco-anxiety that's breaking out and the political anxiety that's all around us is very real, which is why a conference like this and contemplation and so on is essential. And I would also say, this is not to be overly optimistic. I am grounded in sleepless nights. You know, we all are, right? But I think Asian studies, let me back up even. My grandfather was a professor at Columbia of European history. He studied nationalism and birthed a field of nationalism. His last book was Nationalism, a Religion. We're seeing this all over the planet still. But out of the First World War, in studies of many people, came a whole new program at Columbia to try and understand the background of Western civilization, the classics and so on, for peace, for a new world order. Now, his student, Ted DeBerry, my grandfather's student, went to Asia, learned Japanese in the Second World War. All of Asian studies came out of the Second World War, virtually. Not completely, of course, many translations before that. But they came back with such a respect for Asia and such a respect for these cultures that it flourished. And they created Asian studies at Columbia and many other places, and a comparable sense of this is a large and complex planet.
What really inspired me was how many folks are here in their hearts. I mean, there's so many brilliant minds in this group right now, and you know, so many people, as Auntie Puna likes to talk about, with lots of letters on their name, after their name, and so the brilliance is obviously no doubt, but to meet so many of them that are willing to also drop out of the head and be in the present moment and be in their hearts and be sharing that way has been tremendous. I was really enthused by that.
Only in the last year, we are seeing people in the highest levels of governance. Like I've been in touch with a national government just this week, last week, I was speaking to people in the sustainability team in the White House. Recently, before that, the top levels of United Nations Development Program. For the first time, really seeing there's something missing, and wanting to, maybe not for the first time, but like clearly in a deeper way, seeing that there are inner dimensions of the challenges we face and inner solutions that need to be integrated with the great outer work that is already being done.
Really fascinating questions of the inner and the outer and those words we're using. What from the first panel stays with you now about what we learn from indigenous teachings, what we learn from contemplative teachings, what we can understand about these languagings we do with the phrase inner and outer, and just sit with that and see how that feels. Think about the first panel, because this would be like an integrative moment to take the whole conference as it's emerging, so you bring forward something that will now stay with you in an integrated way.
The whole idea, it kind of broke my brain around this language that I'm using being so just by its nature divisive, and it made me feel like, oh, it's not a personality issue, it's actually just a language challenge. So something to think about and find ways of expressing that don't automatically put things against each other.
This language we're speaking has mostly nouns, but indigenous languages have mostly verbs. And verbs have this huge connectivity to them. Nouns are entities of separation in time and space. So yes, we need to be very careful, even though we're speaking with the English language. That language can be very limiting, while if we say it right, it can be liberating. Yes.
I love the quote that let's not forget that the principal mechanism of social change isn't arguing well, but speaking differently. And I think they were speaking differently in a way that we really need.
Even how I use words really matter to me. It's hard for me to say connection. Very hard for me to use that word, connection. It feels like I have to pull out my telephone and then connect. And it's very temporal. So, again, going back to the language, it's relational. Being always a relation in spatial, working in space rather than temporal. So the little I know about what happened starts with me from my meanderings within European history or other histories, basically, because it's here now. The ships have landed. Is they changed our language to codify, standardize our languages so that you understand it. Are we speaking in a language of present? Are we present phobic? Do we want technology to give us a new world? Do we want a new earth, a new country, a new system, a new back to the drawing board, something new? So we always revert back to those domination factors, religion, science, and government. And in that system, it takes 12 years for all of us to be educated. It takes 12 years brought forward by John Gatto in 2008, who was awarded Teacher of the Year here in this state in New York. And he said, it takes 12 years to learn how to become reflexive to authority. Science, religion, and government. They all have domination. Now, how I grew up without the word or the concept, because we don't have it in our language. One of relationship, relating to everything, all. And to speak that language, we can speak human to human language and say we are really communicating. But then there's the human to nature. But then there's a nature to human.
But see here, our body of the East River, sit for a minute and you feel it. You feel her speaking. So our sister came and showed the page of having 5 minutes, probably now 3 years. So I want to give space for her to speak. And maybe we can listen.
What it's like to focus your mind on the worst things that are happening in the world for your entire career, or your first career, and what that does to journalists' own mind and mentality when they have that attention.
We don't report on the plane that lands safely. And that in and of itself is a bias. And I understand it. It does capitalize on a human weakness, which is we evolved to have this negativity bias, which was adaptive because it allowed us to spot saber-toothed tigers and threats, other threats in the environment. But that is as Krista talks about, that is in her TED Talk, she talked about this, that we miss so much. We miss what Krista calls the generative story. And so I think there is this this habit of mind that is just endemic to our field that gives the end user a skewed view of the world.
The generative story is ordinary, right? I mean, it is actually more of what we all experience all the time, every day, in the most ordinary circumstances, in life as it is, which is quiet and random and routine, and also full of chance encounters, which are mostly lovely, right? But yes, I've come, because I've interviewed a lot of scientists across the year, I've come to really have this, to really not take for granted how our bodies are so exquisitely designed to keep us safe, right? That's what they're trying to do. They're trying to keep us safe. But they gave us these very powerful mechanisms that completely override our consciousness.
Krista was saying so beautifully that we need a generative story, a generative culture, and that we need to create it as an ecosystem and to not be siloed in our individual endeavors, but to see it as the collective reality that it is. And so Deanna was just asking, why does the media not report on that story? Why is that story not shared in a way that can be a corrective to our negative bias? And I want to give an example of this. I think in the Trump era and the climate era, journalism learned that you have to adjudicate facts. You can't just report two sides of the story and say, okay, I've done my work because I've given both sides of the story. And so I think what this question is asking is, what role can journalism and the media play in helping to create and foster that ecosystem, which is the perfect question for David, who runs an organization called Solutions Journalism.
Yeah, so, well, first of all, the change is happening. Like, our network, it's a network of journalists around the world and news organizations, thousands of journalists, we've worked with 50,000, that are increasingly looking to do more reporting on how problems are being solved or efforts to solve problems. It's really the adaptive resilience, the we call it hope with teeth, rigorous hope. Where are people doing things that give us a sense, like Dan was saying, like how do we change our brains to be able to see the world this way rather than the world amplifying the most extreme, negatively destabilizing voices. The reason why it's hard to do this is because journalism kind of has, the metaphor right now for journalists is it's kind of like sunlight is the best disinfectant, is a phrase that journalists have used to sort of guide their work for 100 years now. So the idea is like we're penicillin, right? We're supposed to go and kill germs. That idea is very, very, it's like a straitjacket on creativity. I mean, how many days a year do you need penicillin, right? A much better metaphor is like strengthening the immune system, which is the other 360 days of the year. And it's interesting, we're here at Rockefeller University, where like cell biology is the thing, like figuring out the role of the immune system. The dendrites are the media of the immune system. That's how the immune system communicates. They figured this out right here. And they also figured out the incredible problem of stress on the brain, how stress limits the ability of the brain to function well. And they also figured out, or identified adult neurogenesis, the idea of the brain to continue to form new neurons and nerves even in adult mammals. So we have this much, much better metaphors that we could work with in terms of stories that do feed hope with teeth. If the risk is loss of confidence, which I agree with. I think that is a very true statement. We're right now we're in a self-fulfilling loss of confidence loop right now. And so using better metaphors, better ideas of what's journalism's theory of change, how do we use story much more intentionally, given what we understand about human biology and how groups function. We've now wired 8 billion people with these machines. We can actually change those stories very, very quickly. And so that's I think the opportunity, and it is happening, but it really needs to be sped up.
I think that the world, especially in this moment, is going through a lot of relational problems, and I think that a lot of conflicts, and I think that listening in to different perspectives on how to talk to people, to be understood, and do it in as stress-free way as possible is one of the foundations of what we need to do in order to make change.
Laurie Anderson's work deeply expresses the ideas of metamorphosis. She unfolds new ways of seeing the world in deep, whimsical, and transformational ways. Laurie, transform us.
I dreamed I was a dog in a dog show. And my father came to the dog show. And he said, "That's a really good dog. I like that dog." It was a large room full of people, all kinds, and they had all arrived at the same building at more or less the same time, and they were all free, and they were all asking themselves the same question: what is behind that curtain? It's really wonderful to be here today. And I have to say, it is also so daunting, the idea of changing things. It's so daunting when there's so many things I don't even understand, much less know which way they should go or how they should change. But today, a little bit later, I'm going to be talking about stories and what they are and how we tell them to each other. And I'm going to start by telling you a story about words. When I was a child, we lived by a lake, and in the winter, it froze, and we skated everywhere. One evening, I was coming home from the movies, and I was pushing my little brothers, Craig and Phil, in a stroller. And I decided to take them over to the island to look at the moon that was just coming up. But as we got close to the island, the ice broke, and the stroller sank down into the dark water. And my first thought was, Mom's gonna kill me. And I remember the knitted balls on their hats as they disappeared down into the black water. So I ripped my jacket off, and I jumped in the freezing water, and I dove down, and I got Craig, and I pulled him up, and I threw him on the ice. Then I dove down again, but I couldn't find the stroller. It had slipped down the muddy bank, further down under the ice. Then I dove in again, and I finally found the stroller, and Phil was strapped in, and I ripped the strap off, I pulled him up, and I pushed him out on the ice, and then I ran home, one twin under each arm, frozen and screaming. I ran in the door. I told my mother what had happened. And she stood there and she said, "What a wonderful swimmer you are. And I didn't know you were such a good diver. I mean, I was expecting, what were you thinking? You almost killed your brothers." And suddenly I was a kind of a hero. And that was the first time that I learned how much just a very few words can change your whole life.